I'm going to ask Andrea Levere up next, and she's going to give us a kind of a summary of the day's conversation and sort of make some observations. I'd just like to say, just by way of a very brief introduction, Andrea is CEO of Prosperity Now, formerly known as CFED, one of the leading institutions in this country that are helping to build wealth in among low-income individuals and low-income families. She's a tireless advocate for the needs of those who struggle in this country. She's unbelievably smart, and she's super tough, and I do not want to make light of a tragic event, but Andrea was hit by a bus a couple of years ago. And we did not make this joke until after we knew she was recovering okay. But it was the standard line was, Andrea's fine, she's going to be okay, we're not so sure about the bus.
It was a car. So, David, thank you so much, and thank you for that introduction. In New York, where we did this event last week, somehow in the program, it just said Andrea Levere, Prosperity Now. So I was totally ambushed by people asking me if I had changed jobs, and they had never heard of this place before. And how could I have done that? So we will be officially announcing the new name of CFED on Monday, but you get the early update. So, and you can only tell me, the only outcome I want is that you like it. So with that, I want to open up by introducing you to a new category of life, which none of you, many, have to worry about, which is the recovering Washingtonian, which is what I am today, having now been in San Francisco and in California for a little more than 24 hours. And I have to say that this has always been my second home, not simply because CFED's founder, Bob Friedman, is from here. We have an office here. My daughter lives here. But because it's a place that simultaneous to this meeting is hosting the Cannabis Business Summit, which, by the way, for all of us impact investing people, where the hell are they putting their money, and how can we leverage that for social investing? This is my idea, right? Or, I have to say, looking at Kavita, would name a division in a county impact litigation and social justice. Where else would you hear that, right? Or would say that going back to the basics is using Google Forms. That is not going back to any basic I have ever discovered in Washington, all right? So I want to just say a couple of things. We have enjoyed an extraordinary relationship with the San Francisco Federal Reserve Bank and the Community Affairs Division and all the team. We have produced events, wrote articles, published a book, been part of What Matters, and done multiple events. And I just cannot say enough for the entire team and this institution. And as I've told Anthony many times, if I did anything else with my life besides running Prosperity Now, I would be working on nonprofit financial capacity, because it is still an area which is woefully underinvested in. It is key to the future. We've talked some about this today, and so I'm incredibly honored to be part of this book and to be part of this process, and just so grateful for the amazing work that they do. And then to be in the same room as my friend Nancy Andrews, who we met when she came to a class that I taught many, 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 many years ago when I worked for the National Development Council in business credit. And basically, she almost stood up and taught the class with me, which was probably the most fun class we ever had. And we've been friends ever since. So that is a wonderful piece. So I want to say that all of these factors lead to my summary, but they are not the trigger for my presence today. Rather, the trigger is Bruce Springsteen. When Anthony found out that I was as rabid a fan of Bruce as he was, he suddenly could remember my name and asked to come meet me at our office in Washington a few hours before the Bruce concert, right? And at that point, we cooked up what we might do together on a host of things, some of which are still in development as we deal with the realities of life on the East Coast. And it is that inspiration, along with Nancy Andrews' fabulous quote this morning, that we have to create something that's called music. So with that, I'm going to organize the summary of today in 3 parts. And I want to say that, as good as I hope it is, I had a huge advantage of beginning this thinking last Monday. So it was really a feat last Monday. It's less of a feat today. So we are going to start, and there may be some people who are not familiar with Bruce's music. For you, it's just tough. So we are going to start in the land of activities and outputs and explore how this land created much of the structure, culture, and practices that we now aim to change. We are then going to describe how we are in the midst of the Rising, which is an innovation lab creating a new social contract for outcomes. As Anthony writes, between those who deliver social services and those who pay them. And as today's session has demonstrated in really vivid detail, the field has tested and implemented a host of innovations that aim to move us to, who can guess? The land of, if we were in New York, they would have had this in a minute. The land of hope and dreams, where, now one might say that we are already in the land of hope and dreams in San Francisco and the Bay Area, right? All right, so here we go, right? But where our system seeks and advances justice, which is really what we've been talking about all day. So I'm going to craft this journey with the highlights from the outstanding conversations and presentations that were done today, and I'm going to pull in insights from the book, because you just got the book today, although I've had it for a long time. So I'm going to pull out some of my favorite quotes. So let's look at the land of activities and outputs. So there's several chapters in the book, and I was a history major, as was David. How many people in the room were history majors? And a lot. A lot of people end up in social justice when they majored in history. And anthropology, I find, because there's fewer jobs in that field. Several chapters outline the history of social movements, community development, and poverty alleviation that have shaped where we are today. So David Erickson shares a couple of facts which you may know, and even though I've spent my whole life working on this, I've never seen these together. Between the 1940s and the early 1970s, the U.S. poverty rate was estimated to drop from 33% to a low of 11% in 1973. It's kind of an astonishing achievement. Family income increased 75% between 1945 and 1965. In the last 50 years, it hasn't budged. And we know that's the reality for so many of the families and the households that we're working with today. The war on poverty took many leaps forward, and there are particularly 3 that are relevant to us. For the first time, it paired a traditional definition of charity, right, or subsidies, which we call them, and I like to call them subsidies because one of the things we know is the wealthy get many more subsidies than the poor, with market mechanisms. So how do we leverage the market to do our work? It understood that people and place matter, and we had a third element, which we always knew, but we never added it quite as explicitly, power, to add that. And third, we got that there's no silver bullet to anything. And so it's really, whatever we call it, a collective approach, an integrated approach, whatever, that's what is required to make change. Nancy was incredibly articulate about that as she described the evolution of the first book and the lemon drops this morning. So David chronicles the evolution from CDCs to community loan funds to CDFIs as lenders, and also the creation of new financing tools, whether they were program-related investments or social impact bonds, as we've heard today. And there is a real recognition, and there's a great chapter written by Emily Gustafson-Wright that really shows how the responsibility for service delivery moved from the public sector to the nonprofit sector consistently and en masse over time. And this really leads to a very riveting insight in Ian's article, which really says the social safety net was privatized long ago. And that's a very powerful insight for how we think about this work. However, the practice of categorical funding, everybody know what that is? That is, you just fund one thing. Living in Washington, you hear the word categorical all the time. Or, in the vivid word of Nancy Andrews, in her article, chaotic funding, I like that even better, led to a focus on activities, compliance, and price as the core drivers of the field, rather than the outcomes or capacity of the service provider. Ian comments, and we heard this in the panel right up there, this reluctance to fund organizational capacity leads to an endless cycle of resource scarcity, which tragically is reinforced by the continuing lack of capacity need to prove program effectiveness, which would otherwise limit funder risk and break the cycle of scarcity. Or, as Lewis just said, what can you live with, right? In New York last week, Darren Walker, president of the Ford Foundation, summed this up. Our funding architecture is so counterproductive to our goals. Fred Blackwell, and I think David quoted what I already had quoted, the reality that there's a shameful, wasteful paradox of a resource-rich yet outcomes-poor city. Of all the places in America that should not have that problem, it's San Francisco. And then Carrie Kellogg wrote in her article, until the Great Recession, publicly funded workforce programs were incentivized to concentrate on short-term outcomes only. And then Anthony sums it up. Realizing this potential will require all of us to honestly acknowledge how many of our cherished practices and assumptions are accommodations to a broken system rather than necessary or beneficial. And that was really reflected in this panel about how hard it is to make these changes. So that's where we came from. Where are we now? The rising. So today, we really see how leaders from the public, nonprofit, and private sectors have really risen up, not in a religious sense, to create an innovation lab, which is really what I'd call it, that is aiming to transform this land through a new social contract based on outcomes. One of the things I said earlier to David is that the representation in New York was slightly different than here. You had a much stronger philanthropic voice here. But in New York, we had some private sector people. So I'm going to bring both of those perspectives in as we go through these summaries. So we've heard from the innovators and the organizations that are shaping this social contract. And I want to pull out 5 fundamental elements or characteristics of what this world is looking like. Number 1, you've got to change the culture. If there was a theme throughout the whole day, and I heard it in multiple ways, it was changing the culture. There's a fabulous article that David cited in his overview called Rules and Rituals. I always, to my staff, say whenever we're trying to do anything, culture eats strategy for lunch, which is my favorite phrase. But we are all framing out this issue, and I think the heart of it is this question of trust. And Lewis, in your article, you didn't say this, but he spoke to the realities that all the agreements for the pay for success are really not being honored because everybody still wants oversight, right? And we heard multiple conversations today about what that means. So Fred Ally said, trust your grantees to do what is in their best interest. Don Howard said, change your view of who has the answer. And the whole framing of this, and Louis, I'll take a line from your article, what does it mean to be a responsible steward of public funding? So really at the heart of this is trust. Number two, we need to define and right-side the intervention to the outcome. And a way to frame this all is we have to generate new business models that achieve outcome goals. Tyler announces that everyone is in the health sector. We have to think about what it takes to achieve population health, which is what's so intimidating about this, right? David describes, oh my God, all right, 3 minutes? David describes poverty, it's going to be 5, thank you, as a complex adaptive system that is addressed only by keeping the end goal in mind. So I'm going to paraphrase Lewis, who said, adaptive problems require adaptive solutions. And that's really what the business models need to be that we have to look at. Hope SF is a perfect example of marrying a multi-strategy, cross-sector approach of collective impact with a pay-for-performance model. And then Carrie and Carla really raise social enterprises as the structure of what's going to really serve these business models. Number 3, we have to build a new data infrastructure and the capacity to use it. Sam encourages us to do radical transparency, and we really have to make sure we are measuring the right outcomes and have the capacity to do it. There's a fabulous quote in the book by Jacob Harrell that says, how we organize information matters for how we understand the world and how we act on it. Nowhere is this truer than in the work of social good. Number 4, as we heard multiple times, financial innovation is the means, not the ends. Let's fund the true cost of service delivery and lower the cost of the net grant or loan. So Anthony's predecessor, Clara Miller, has a fabulous idea or image called the net grant, which is after you've done everything it takes to get a grant, how much do you actually have, right? And so my staff refused to allow me to use that word because they'd get too depressed. But a huge theme in this book is what the net amount of funding we get after we do all the things to get the funding that we need. And so a whole piece of this financial innovation that's going on is how do we make that much more efficient and also pay the full cost of what needs to be done. Tyler said today, our investments must be made in the right dose. My favorite phrase from business school is you've got to match your sources to uses of funds. A part of this movement is reframing what that means. Number 5, community entrepreneurs who own the outcome risks are the CDCs of the 21st century. That's what David said. If we're looking for population level change, it requires that we can operate at that level. And it's really broader than the work of just one organization. We've heard that citizens and residents must stand up and demand change, and also that when you are implementing a program, life happens. So let me just summarize this phrase, and I'll be very quick. We are at the very beginning of developing the connector tools and vehicles to marry buyers and sellers. But once we have more than a few pilots, the potential to create a large and vibrant market is enormous. So, and Anthony said we'd have music accompaniment, which we don't, so I might make you sing. You might make you sing.
No one wants that.
So let's move to the land of hopes and dreams, and I'll summarize this up. Where every kid has bright eyes, right? That's what we're aiming for. Whistler and Gee in the book frame this new land where we have the opportunity to ignite a public sector innovation revolution in our lifetime. And Lewis had a great line. You had a lot of great lines, Lewis. You'll have to be in the video. We only have adult conversations, right? It's a different world. So let me just talk about what that world will look like. We have a system that's oriented to outcomes and results around the ultimate good we seek. In New York, we had one of the architects of the federal policies from the Program on Social Innovation in the White House, which of course no longer exists. And I had 4 things that I heard today that I want to be in that system. Every county has a community bail fund, right? Every county. We are selling child well-being bonds. We have radical transparency that rules public sector contracting, and we spend 80% of the $3.2 trillion in the right way, all right? That's our land of hopes and dreams. We are engaging communities to share the rewards of this new system and ensure they have both physical and medical homes and the power and advocacy capacity to really say what they need. And then I would add, no more surveys. There's real leadership at the institutional level across sectors and lines of business. And one issue that wasn't raised as much here as it was in New York, which I think is really, really important, is that we have to craft the stories, although that picture is a pretty good one, to reflect this new reality that affirms and rewards these new behaviors. We have to be able to tell those stories. And then the other piece is we have some very important tailwinds that are coming our way. In New York, we talked a lot about the sense of corporate social responsibility really becoming real. If you'd asked me a couple of years ago what I thought of it, it's probably not quotable. But today, it's incredibly critical, and we are aligning with the private sector in ways I never could have imagined in the absence of other forces. So we also heard about anchor institutions and how critical they're going to be. We've heard the role of policy and civic engagement, and we hear about the critical track records and legacies of social enterprise and how we need to leverage that. So to close, Anthony will have the closing remarks. We need a new narrative centered in a moral commitment that our society will do better for the poorest and most vulnerable people among us, and we need to organize this new narrative around that success. What Matters has taken a huge leap in writing that narrative, and all of you who've contributed to that today will add to its success. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrea. That was awesome. I'm so glad we got that on video. So we're going to use that again. Why don't you go first?
Yeah, so we just wanted to quickly close. We have a nice setup. Thank you to the San Francisco Federal Reserve right outside with beer and other inducements. Maybe we can get the next revolution going with the beer out there.
Right.
And again, I just wanted to thank everyone for your time and your patience, and those of you following along at home or wherever you are. Really want to just say thank you for your time. And just really quickly, it's going to be like an Oscar speech. They'll play me off, so I'll make it really fast. A set of thank yous that I personally have on behalf of Nonprofit Finance Fund. First of all, thank you. The partnership with the San Francisco Federal Reserve Bank has been fantastic. David and Ian and the whole team here, the staff, the people who've been helping today. This really does take a lot of effort. So I wanted to say thank you to you guys. First of all, as amazing partners for this work. To the funders of this project who provided funding to Nonprofit Finance Fund, not to the Federal Reserve Bank, who have been self-funding their work on this. Bank of America Foundation, the Robin Hood Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, I'm heading west now, the Kresge Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, and here in the Bay Area, the Omidyar Network have all provided funding to the Nonprofit Finance Fund to enable us to do this work. So I wanted to say thank you to them. Thank you to the NFF team that is here. If you guys want to just raise your hands. I've got a lot of colleagues here from both the Los Angeles office of Nonprofit Finance Fund as well as the San Francisco office that will be the San Francisco office for the next 3 weeks. We're going to become the Oakland office in the middle of next July, moving in with Tyler and a bunch of you guys. So really excited. The Bay Area office and the LA office as well at NFF are growing, and really great to have the team here. And then I just wanted to say, First of all, we heard today no more surveys. There's one more survey. I see one there. If you could please fill out your surveys, hand your out. We're trying to be accountable to outcomes. And for us, this project, part of being outcomes oriented, we've always envisioned this project as much more than a book, and even more than a book with these launch events. For us, the outcome we're trying to seek is to fundamentally really help accelerate the pace at which a healthy shift toward the kinds of conversations you saw going on in the last panel can occur. How can we collectively create the conditions in which there are going to be more of these partnerships between Santa Clara County and Abode and many of the other ones you've talked about? So for us at Nonprofit Finance Fund, what we can offer you is we're really bringing the full force of our organization to this work. We really do three things. We do consulting work. We're going to be in the Bay Area, likely in Oakland. I think it's set up. I'm not sure it's confirmed. But we're going to be doing free trainings for community-based groups who want to orient in this way and want that first step and support from us to do that. Our financing team is exploring what it's going to take to finance these kinds of arrangements when the funding comes in. It's going to require organizations to do the work up front before they get paid when the results occur, and that's going to take financing that we're really excited to explore. We're already investors in pay for success deals, but we think there's a lot more ways to do that. And then finally, this work is really about changing minds and behavior. And so I wanted to enlist all of your support in what we see as a national campaign. We call this a knowledge campaign. With the generosity of the Federal Reserve Bank, there are going to be free copies of this book to anyone who wants them, who can make use of them productively. So go back to your boards, order copies for them, talk to your funders. Those of you who are coming from these communities, talk to activists in the communities who want to take these ideas and get the kind of validation and insights that can come from this. Go online, order books. Let me know personally if there's an opportunity for us to show up in your community and support that effort. So really wanted to enlist all of you in this knowledge campaign. As Andrea said at the end, what excites me about this is not just how we can use money more efficiently and create the kinds of outcomes and a non-paternalistic relationship that we heard about. At its core, this agenda, I believe, has to be linked to what Andrea quoted my saying at the end, which is a fundamental recommitment in our society to a sense that we have an obligation to take care of each other. And that commitment is too easily undermined when people are able to say, well, our social system and all this money we spend doesn't achieve results. So let's just give up on the idea that we can achieve those results. And if we give up on that idea, then we give up on the fundamental view that we have an obligation to take care of each other. And so when all this is said and done, and we've talked about incentives and financing and everything else, what I believe is that this is a movement about recommitting ourselves as a country to take care of each other by forging a more successful and visibly effective social system that takes the generosity of donors and taxpayers, the hard work of people in this room, and the communities who need the support and achieve those better outcomes in the long term. If we're going to do that, it can't be about any institution, it can't be about any financing structure, it's got to be about all of us working together. And so I want to encourage you guys to stick around, because if we're going to work together, we're going to have to forge these trusting relationships. That occurs around tables like this, and hopefully around the libations that are outside as well. But really encourage everyone here to find someone new you can work with in this room and help us spread the word. So thank you all.
So I should have gone first so we could just end on that, because that was so good. I just have three really quick things to say. So one is I want to thank the 220 people who joined us here to be in community with us, to have this conversation. I want to thank the 110 people who are online who watched. I want to make one comment on apparently the social media has been pretty strong, and I think we're trending number 3 in the Bay Area, and that's with the Warriors and the cannabis convention. So that's pretty good, I think. A quick note about the books. Those of you who attended the New York event and this event have a rare first edition of the book. There are a few typos and things that we're going to clean up and fix in subsequent issues. This is like that issue. This is like that version of Origin of the Species where Darwin misspelled Galapagos or whatever, and now it sells for like $1 million on eBay. So like you have that copy now. We make these individually, as I mentioned before, and so for those of you maybe online or when you ask people to order the book, it may take a little while for it to get to you, but we will promise we'll get it to you. There's also the other 3 book websites in your program, so I encourage you to take a look at that, and please feel free to order as many books as you like of those as well. The last thing I just say, we were really lucky today to kind of capture the excitement in the room, and I want to thank Alex with the camera, Kevin with the video, Peter who made sure we could hear, and Billy in the back who's keeping an eye on the web stream and making all of that happen. So thank you for all of that, and please stay with us for a little bit. Let's head on out.